Hi, my name is Elizabeth Moreira. I'm running for California's District 38, and this is my foreign policy gauntlet. First topic I'd like to discuss is the Israel-Palestinian conflict. I first want to start off by saying that there should be a clear separation between the actions of Israeli government and the Israeli people. There's actually many Israeli people that do not support the government's actions or persecution of the Palestinian people. There's also many Israeli Arab peace projects and organizations that are actively pursuing a solution to the violence. That said, the Israeli government currently holds an illegal occupation and forced displacement of the Palestinian people, plain and simple. Many would like to call those who oppose this ethnic cleansing as anti-Semitic, as a way to shame those speaking out against the actions of the Israeli government. Support for Palestinian people's right to live is not anti-Semitic. In actuality, the Israeli government are the ones who should be shamed. The Israeli people understand firsthand the devastating effects of segregation, persecution, and hate towards those that some view as less or different, yet they would enact violence and suffering towards the Palestinian people. To be clear, there has been violence and death on both sides. Right? This conflict's gone on for generations, and the real difference between the two is the power they hold. Overwhelming number of difference in casualties. Israel has a powerful, well-funded military. They're independently wealthy as a nation and a leader in technology advancements. Roughly 250 Israelis have been killed, and 5,600 roughly have been injured. Palestine, on the other hand, they do not have a military of their own. They do not hold much wealth, nor do they possess advanced technological advantages. To date, actually, 5,600, I think, was the last recorded number. Palestinian people have died, and over 115,000 have been injured. Just as an idea of the scale and the differences between the military force. One of the biggest issues is the United Nations, right? Of the 193 states that serve in the United Nations, 138 have recognized the statehood of Palestine. The United States is not among them. The United States pretends to support a two-state system, and they publicly address a support for peace between Israel and Palestine, yet we continue to fund the Israeli and their illegal apartheid state. The United States sends billions each year to aid Israel. We even provide for their universal healthcare system, which is ironic since medical bills are the largest source of debt among Americans. Despite being both independently and technologically wealthy, we continuously send funding for their military, including fully paying for their Iron Dome, which the Iron Dome is great. Okay, it's a system they needed, but it's not something we should continue funding, nor something we should have solely given to Israeli government. Despite progressives speaking out against this bill for the most recent bill for the Iron Dome, the United States Congress voted overwhelmingly in favor of it. And that includes my current district's incumbent, Linda Sanchez. Overall, it was seen as the wrong time to send money to Israel. Personally, there's no way we didn't send a message of full support for their actions. Our country continuously sends that one clear message to the world. We support Israel's terroristic actions. The United States wants to be seen as a world leader, yet the example we set is one where those with the most continuously take from those with the least. We're a nation that desperately and delusionally believe that military force bring power and respect. True respect and power would actually come from taking a public stand against our allies and their treatment of the Palestinian people, demanding a resolution for peace and a two-state system, and withholding funding until an agreement can be reached. Our funding can then be used to aid our allies in creating this transition rather than using it as a resource to destroy. I now want to talk to you about the Department of Defense audit. 2017 was the first time the Pentagon launched its own first independent DoD audit. They did not pass that audit, nor have they passed any audit since. Bernie Sanders recently stated that the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex have been plagued by a massive amount of waste and financial mismanagement for decades. Financial mismanagement is another area we really need to look into with this audit. We not only need to cut the budget, but restructure our spending. Our defense spending should be just that, primarily for defense and protection of our people and ensuring that we protect those here at home from actual threats and take care of those who have served our country. Our DoD is in desperate need of transparency and clarity regarding its fiscal accounting and allocating. We need to have more control over our direct spending, our contracts, negotiation, and defense resources. To start, we have more than enough funding in DoD and should immediately stop improving increased budgeting. We need to cut unnecessary or special interest spending and redirect resources away from contractors and take on our own cost-efficient manufacturing. We need to completely restructure our vision of defense and focus our DoD to include departments for climate and pandemic defense. We also need to include Veterans Affairs and International Affairs departments under these defense categories. We cannot continue to allow our fiscal resources to be sent to foreign and special interests, plain and simple. We need to audit the DoD. We must require a penalty for failure to pass, especially failure to pass again. The current proposal is about 1% of the department's budget that fails an audit would be returned back to settle our national debt. I actually would go further to say each year it is not passed, that percentage should be compounded. There is zero reason we are continuously funding these underregulated, lack of sight and lack of transparency organizations and departments without having this penalty if they fail their audit. And now I want to talk a little about military spending. As I previously mentioned, we spend more on defense than any other country by a lot. As a matter of fact, our defense budget of 2020 was $735 billion, is more than the next 11 countries combined and what they spend on their military budget. I also previously established that we are wasteful with this funding and we use it to enrich war merchants and military contractors. We do not use or allocate our resources appropriately when spending. And so for this topic, I'd like to discuss the major things we do not cover in our country. Just to give you an idea, at the gross of our funding we have at the DoD and the little we do with it here at home. So first and foremost, our military spending does not help our veterans or Veterans Affairs. That is a budget that must be approved separately. Our veterans are told they are supported and appreciated when they leave military service. We hear it all the time, thank you for your service, yet they are often ill-equipped for life outside. To start, the military trains you to do one thing, a job in the military. When you get out and want to start a life of your own, or maybe even just do something different than the military. The fact that they trained you, you're leaving the military at maybe 35 years old, and as an adult, you have a specialty as a ROW operator. There are very few practical uses that one would have with that in the real world. You're often left starting from scratch. So there are no programs right now really out there that help establish a life outside of the military. We do give funding for veterans, depending how long they served, to go back to school. But a lot of veterans in the military have families, they start families, and sometimes a full-time student isn't necessarily an option for them. An overwhelming number of veterans as well, they suffer from different post-military or post-war illnesses, mental health issues, and disabilities. So things like PTSD, high suicide rates. There's actually a lot of recent conversation happening about cancer that's coming from burn pits from overseas wars, hearing loss, arthritis. The list goes on, and yet our VA claims that this is difficult to prove that it is service connected. So these veterans are left even without health care. This honestly should be an easy one. There's zero reason we're not taking care of our veterans. So when I talk about military spending, I really want to establish that we only spend on the military that is active and the wars we want to enact. We do not spend to defend those who defended us. And I think the bare minimum we should do is make sure that mandatory health care is one thing that we're doing for our veterans here at home. All of them, regardless of a service-related disability, their families, and making sure that they are set up for life after they leave the military. My next focus is on nuclear weapons. Should we have nuclear weapons as a nation? Allow them globally? Simply put, no. They should be banned. We often hear about other countries such as Korea or Iran gaining nuclear weapon technology and the need for intervention. The truth is, we nor the other 5 countries that have them should. China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, we all have nuclear weapons. Now, 3 of these countries, the United Kingdom, France, and China, have a very low stockpile, a couple hundred of these, and they are not actively funding and building new ones on any kind of scale as we are. The US, on the other hand, we seem to be very much in an arms race with Russia. We currently have over 5,000 nuclear warheads, while Russia has over 6,000 accounted for. Just a fraction of these would be enough, by the way, to annihilate civilization globally. But we've decided we need well above that. One thing that is not often discussed is also the pile of retired nuclear warheads. We've amassed, after there's no longer a strategic mission for them, we go put them into retirement. So they're not fully disassembled. They can be reactivated. They are in a way disarmed, but it's still, again, going back to an enormous amount of waste in our budget. And, that's not something we currently even understand. We currently have over 1,700 nuclear warheads that are retired. We also have an additional 1,700 nuclear warheads that are actually deployed globally. This would be in comparison to 1,600 that Russia has deployed globally as well. So nuclear warheads they're one thing. They are civilian killers. These are not necessary to go to war, to engage in war, or to bring an end to a war. They are designed to kill the most innocent civilians, people, families, whatever term you want to use there. They are designed to kill as many as possible in the most inhumane way possible. Rather you die from a blast, building crushing, or the radiation that would follow. It's just absolutely, we've seen the devastation it's caused, and there's zero reason after Hiroshima that we would even continue projects like this, especially from a position as a strategic leader in this global environment. From an outside perspective, the US rules by force. I would say that those who have this technology are probably the least historically trustworthy, and are often invading other countries for their own personal gain. There is little you cannot take when you control the ability to eliminate a country's people and their livelihood. I definitely think that we need to be a global leader in nuclear weapons, but in the way of banning them. We need to set the example. We need to set the stage. We need to immediately stop funding these weapons. We need to stop funding technology and research into these weapons. And we need to make sure that we are pushing not only our nation itself, but others on a global structure to make sure that these weapons are decommissioned, deconstructed, and not repeated. I now want to discuss war tax. This is plain and simple. A war tax is a tax on individuals used to pay for war. The American people do not get to choose when we go to war, and we should not pay for that war. There should never be a war tax. We already pay through our taxes historically, depending what war we're in. Since World War II, about 45 to 90% of our taxes towards military spending. We spend more than any other nation and have a history using these finances to enrich ourselves, corporations, and defense contractors. So we don't even spend this money wisely, yet we would propose a burden and tax on people. We just left a 20-year war. We entered under false pretenses. We occupied a foreign country. We left without care to those whose lives we had uprooted, and the result at the end was no different from when we entered in the first place, with the exception of lives lost, billions of dollars spent to fund this war, and billions of dollars made by contractors annually. Wars should be the absolute last resort. As a statement of fact, the American people do not get a say, as I mentioned, when we go to war. The American people rarely agree with the wars we are in, and the United States does not use its military force or powers to help countries that are suffering from civil wars or corruption or genocide. So we don't even use the force and power that we have to make the lives better for people in other countries. It's literally just a way for us to benefit as a nation. And it is not, again, something that we should be imposing on the American people. A war tax is another example of reverse trickle-down society. We constantly take from those who have the least to enrich those who have the most. I absolutely do not support a war tax. However, if you would like to tax the corporations that profit the most from these wars, I'm all about that. I would now like to talk a little about ending forever wars. As a post 9/11 vet, I once thought that long-term occupations were for the protection and defense of our people. I thought we were also using our military power to aid other countries in need or under attack. Unfortunately, we do not often use war as a way to aid others or to defend ourselves. Forever wars often lead to illegal occupations from the United States. As I have mentioned, we also use these wars as opportunities to enrich ourselves, our contractors, and honestly, just out of pure greed. The war in Afghanistan is no exception. We paid billions to contractors, Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, DynCorp, Fluor, KBR. That's just a few of the companies that made billions from our extended stay in Afghanistan. And every single war we go to, it's the same outcome, same results. Contractors rake in profits. They make a lot of money providing things that we need to fund these wars. And they in turn share some of that by legal bribery and donating to congressional candidates and presidents and you name it. It is just a corrupt cycle and circle, and unfortunately it leads to heartbreak and devastation and lives lost. We often hear that we leave our troops to occupy a country such as Afghanistan for their own benefit. And that pulling our troops out would leave their people vulnerable and defenseless. In actuality, they do not want us there. This is not to say that we don't ever do good while we are there. We or offer humanitarian aid or bring new systems of governing to enhance their lives or the people that are there. But we need transparency as to why we are there. I had previously mentioned burning pits that soldiers that go overseas to war are suffering from conditions now with. And these conditions can be from asthma to cancer. They're devastating, they're often life-threatening, and we're not even supporting our veterans who live near, breathe in all this, the smoke from these burning pits. If we don't treat our people here at home, how are we leaving the people in these countries who also experience the same outcome? Just a little clarity, side note on burning pits, really should look into them. And I know that I've got a little into that, but it's essentially hazardous medical waste, human waste, trash, all together lit on fire, creates an enormous amount of black smoke and pollution and disease in the air. So it's something we made illegal in 1970 here in the United States, but we continue to do in other countries that do not know better. Back on Afghanistan, President Bush used the tragedy of 9/11 to actually pass I believe it's the Hague Invasion Act. This actually allowed us to invade any country for any reason without approval from Congress. The terrorist attacks of 9/11 motivated many like myself to join and fight for their country. What we didn't know is that active duty service members would be sent to countries all over the globe that had little to nothing to do with 9/11. This was not what most Americans signed up for. Worse, many of them were deceived into fighting against people whose country we invaded under false pretenses. The US did this for power, profit, and plain and simple. As I've mentioned multiple times, there is a huge profit margin behind these forever wars. The cost of this war was way more, though, than just money. Thousands of servicemen and civilian lives were lost. People were exposed to those poisons I mentioned. We have vets that suffer from mental health conditions, PTSD, depression, and suicide. We must put a stop to forever wars. Since President Bush, not one president, Republican or Democrat, have reversed the invasion clause that was enacted by Bush. The first thing we must do is reverse this provision and put the decision of war back to a vote. We cannot hope to end forever wars while those in power or those who stand to profit can freely invade without oversight. Wars are costly, they're devastating, and they are a point of no return. We must exhaust all diplomatic options prior to our declaration of war. And we definitely should issue a declaration of war prior to bombing any other country.